So welcome, everyone. I haven't been here in a while, and there's a reason. I have been studying Judaism. I don't know very much about Judaism, though I'm brought up to be a very proud Jew. And I know there's a lot of trouble going on now in Israel and Gaza, and it's broken my heart. And I want to tell you something. I'm going to start with this. I usually wear Katagiri Roshi. I'm feeling very emotional right now. Katagiri Roshi was my teacher, and actually, Roshi, Joan Roshi, had the smarts to give Wendy Lau his name, Dinan, and ordained her on January 19th, which was Katagiri's birthday. Katagiri died of cancer in 1962 at 62 years old. No, 1990, I'm sorry. And he was 62 years old. So usually I wear a purple rakusu. Some of you don't know what it is. I don't want to really, as a writer and a teacher, I don't take anything for granted, but I don't want to spend all my time explaining it. But it's something that you see people wearing, and you vow, supposedly when I did it, vowed to be a Buddhist for the rest of your life. And here I am, a Jew. Well, you know what? You could be both. And you can be Christian and a Zen person. And you could be a Muslim and a Zen person. But anyway, I'm going to get into that. So I usually wear Katagiri's fancy rakusu that I was given. But I thought today, I can't wear it because it's falling apart. But my original one with him. And I want to tell you, everyone wants a piece of the teacher, but you sometimes don't get it for many decades later. Remember that. Because I haven't taken this out in a long time, and this is really the one he gave me and hand wrote and everything. And he explained here what my name was. It's completely faded. I couldn't read it. I can vaguely read it now. And I think before I took it for granted, and now, why, there's his handwriting, fading very fast. It looks a little like my mother's handwriting. So remember that. You all want something, and I did too, and you don't get it. Sometimes for a long time afterwards is when you realize it. So one of the things he told me during Yom Kippur, I sat a session at Yom Kippur, and it was the third week in September. And this was way back in the 80s, I guess, or the 70s. And I was sitting with Katagiri, and that's all we did was sit. He was a Japanese Zen teacher. He didn't speak English well. He came over to help Suzuki Roshi, and then Minnesota Zen Center invited him. So he was sick of the hippies. So he moved over to Minneapolis. So he was very straight-laced, which I'm not, but I just was well behaved. I just did everything. I loved it. So during a session, I'd been sitting for quite a while at this time. During one session, it was Yom Kippur. And if you know Yom Kippur, it's the holiest of holies for Judaism. And you usually fast and, and pray that you're in the book of life for the next year, etc. But I didn't really care. I just cared about Zen, and I wasn't brought up very religious at all. So I remember I went into Dokusan. This is what I mean about you learn something much later. And I said to him, the more I sit, the more Jewish I feel. And he said, well, that makes sense. The more you sit, the more you become who you are. And then he said, the killer. He said, why don't you leave here? I said, are you trying to get rid of me? He said, why don't you leave here and go study Judaism? You don't know anything about it. Go study. And, you know, and it was true. I never met a rabbi. I'd never been to a bar mitzvah. I really didn't know much about it. And so immediately I started complaining. I don't want to leave, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to do this. And he said, if you do this and go deep enough, you'll find Zen in the depth of Judaism. And I did. I went away for 6 months, and I had just won a fellowship, a poetry fellowship. That was a long time ago. I was a poet. And I went to Israel. I was so naive. I got off the plane and I thought they were all going to serve me bagels and lox. I mean, you know, I really knew, that's how little I knew. You know, I just knew, you know, New York Jewish kosher delis. So, and I lived with my grandparents and my parents. So after 6 months, I couldn't find anything. I kind of hated it. And I went back. And I remember I walked in from the back and there were a lot of empty chairs, and Kadagiri leaped over them and said, well, how was it? And I said, I'm back. And I guess he understood, because it's only now. Okay, now listen to this carefully. I've been studying and sitting in on some classes in Judaism. I hope they won't listen. And first I was like, I couldn't, you know, I'm so seeped in Zen that at first I thought it was, it was so different. You know, first of all, everybody came late, which I loved, because we had to be there 5 minutes early. An hour and a half class, we have to have a snack in the middle of it. We take a break for a snack. It was just so different. So, but I kind of liked it. But what I realized, it was that I had practiced enough of Zen so I could recognize in Judaism the real religion. I could recognize Zen. And Zen helped me, gave me a structure so I could continue to keep going, because I would have quit like I did. It must have been 30 years ago now. Could that be? Yeah, the beginning of the 80s or late 70s. I'm doing the math right, who cares? 40 years ago. Anyway, do you understand that? This was really important for me, so you sometimes learn from your teacher much later. And it's only now that I can see in the heart, because I know the heart of Zen, I can see the heart of Judaism. And I keep thinking, this isn't possible. This isn't what I was brought up with. I want to eat a pastrami sandwich, but it's really there. And my guess is it's there in Christianity, but you have to be willing to go deep enough. And so Zen actually gave me the structure to keep going and to ask the right questions. Does this make sense to people? And so only now do I realize what a gift it is. And I'm careful. So I've stayed away from everything because I don't want to get into fights. I'm not interested in who's right, who's wrong. Nobody's right, nobody's wrong. There's great suffering. And I understand that. So I'm not going to wear this because it's going to fall apart. But thank you, Roshi. Thank you. And I really wanted to share that with you because it's amazing. Roshi has been dead 34 years. And now he's still teaching me. And It's so wonderful to come here because I haven't been here in about, since probably Wendy Johnson has been here, that I'm so happy that Roshi Halifax, Roshi Joan, and all of you are continuing, and that it's so important because you think, what am I doing this for? You know, there's wars all over the world. You can help them because this will give you a structure for it. I've sat in the plaza for 6 months, sitting for peace in the Middle East with my handwritten sign, and I knew how to do it because I'd practiced for a long time. And I wasn't sitting for Zen, I was sitting for Gaza and Israel. I could go on about that, but that isn't really where I want to go. But I want you to remember that. You want the teacher, but you don't get the teacher for a long, long time. Some things you get right away. This gorgeous building, good meals, but some things you don't get for a long time. You don't even know what they're talking about. But my way has always been, I'm laughing because my way has been sort of like osmosis. I didn't care if I understood or not. I just showed up. What did Dogen say? When you walk in the mist, you get wet. And actually, I really wanted to be a writer. Thank God. So it kept me from getting too political in the Minnesota Zen world. And Katagiri was my great writing teacher. And really, I learned Zen and writing. And now I call myself semi-retired, which is a wonderful thing because you have space to digest your life. Otherwise, I was very, very busy. I loved everything I did, but I taught thousands of people. I was going nonstop. And if I wasn't teaching, I was writing another book. And so now I'm digesting things, where I came from, who I am, how did I get into Zen, what is Zen? And I understand now, in 1986, when Writing Down the Bones came out, I knew it was just Zen. I was soaked in it, but I was talking about writing. But in our country then, nobody had ever heard of Zen. You know, now everybody knows it. Zen perfumes and this and that. But at that time, nobody knew it. And so I thought, okay, they think I'm teaching writing. It doesn't matter. It's the same thing. So this is called A Guide to Finding Your Voice, which the publisher changed it to. It was Remembering What Matters. And it's writing on empty. And it's really about the COVID years and how I found my way. And I'm so glad that Hunt is here because he really helped me with it. Do you remember? He really, really helped me. And then he disappeared. And the other person, and the other person was Sarah Stuckey, but I don't know where she is. But Hunt was really, we were back and forth. He was staying at Cozan's and we'd run back and forth. And he was so encouraging. I would show him a chapter and I'd say, you think I could do this? And he said, yeah, sure, it's great. I thought, okay. And then I didn't put any acknowledgments in this book. I've written lots of books, so sometimes I just don't feel like it. I feel like I'm just, phew, I did it. Okay. So I thought I would read you a little. You don't usually read the epilogue, but I want to read you the epilogue for special reasons. Have you read the epilogue? You know what's in it?
No, the word epilogue.
Oh. She nodded. Yes, excellent. That's a good beginning. And I was very proud that most of the book, I was going to say, most of the book, I hardly mentioned Upaya because it's right down the road. And I just turned a page, and as I walked down the road to drop off something at Upaya Zen Center, so it's there, but I'm reading the epilogue for a special reason about Upaya. Okay. And this maybe only writers would be interested in, but I'm very excited about this. There are no chapters. It was broken into parts. Okay. And my next book is sections. You have a next book, Natalie? Well, of course. Do you ever stop practicing? No. So you never stop writing, unfortunately. Okay, so here's the epilogue. I'm going to read it, and then I want to talk about it a little. And I want to talk about what's happening here in the fall practice period, because I was very excited about it. And if we're Japanese, we'd say the autumn practice period. Okay. So here's the epilogue, part 9. I don't think Hunt heard this. I went beyond you, Hunt. Okay. What the pandemic gave me, besides tremendous fear, was time and space. I had been so busy all my life, especially the last 35 years, traveling to teach all over the country and the world. And when I was home, I worked on a book. I loved it all. But then it seemed my mortality was right under my nose. Did anything else matter? I don't know why I thought in the deep recesses of my mind that I would live forever. I guess on a good day, a lot of us feel that way. But I began to notice when I went to a museum and loved someone's work, I quickly calculated how old they were when they died. And Helen Frankenthaler, 1928 to 2011, age 83. Joan Mitchell, not the singer, but the painter, American, lived most of her life in France, 1925 to 1992. She died at 67, young. Susan Rothenberg, 1945 to 2020, 75. American painter who lived in Galisteo, New Mexico, near me. I was stunned to see Rothenberg's dates after her name, a jolt to my body as I stood in front of her painting in the Phillips Collection, Washington, D.C. She smoked a lot. Mitchell drank. I tried to rationalize. No matter, I knew at the bottom of every life, a limitless moan played out. However, we were able to deal with it, face it or not face it, and that it wasn't our place to get arrogant, judgmental, thinking we knew someone else's life. Can I tell you that I also went to a horse's grave in Lexington, Kentucky, secretariats, usually a great racehorse's heart, head, and hooves are buried. But Secretariat was buried at 19, whole, at Claiborne Farm, which is considered a great honor. Obviously, horses have a very different lifespan. It was a relief to imagine another being buried there, other than a human being. Secretariat, nicknamed Big Red, won the Triple Crown in 1973 and still holds the fastest record for all 3 races. Mostly men at Claiborne Farm told me about a racehorse's heart, the capacity of the blood pumping through it as the horse ran. Secretariat's heart was estimated to weigh 22 pounds, twice the size of an average horse's. On that visit, they kept repeating to me that Secretariat won the Belmont by 31 lengths. He was so far ahead in the end that his jockey, Ron Turcott actually turned to look behind because suddenly there were no horses around them. So many years later, the enthusiasm in those men was still palpable. My father's racing enthusiasm passed down to his daughter. My father was buried in 1999 in a Hebrew cemetery in the family plot, coincidentally very near to Belmont Park. The shouts at the racetrack could be heard over my father's grave. His daughter no longer believed in the races after understanding how they hurt the thoroughbreds. If my father were still alive, I'm sure he would have responded, "That's malarkey, Natalie. They were made to race." That was an old way of thinking, but Secretariat was a glory. He's the only animal whose grave I ever went to. No, never even a dog's or a cat's. I realize in other chapters I talk about visiting graves. Other species and beings have different lifespans. Grass has this one summer, not the same grass comes back. A fly's lifespan is 28 days. A blue whale, the biggest whale with a heart almost the size of a small piano, lives many years. Let us not forget the common brown house moth, which lives 1 to 6 months, or the ponderosa pine, its bark smelling of vanilla or butterscotch, which can live, if it's lucky, up to 500 years. Do trees have luck? Do we? Or is it a preponderance of circumstances? In the days of my retirement, in that space that opened up, I remembered I always had a dream of riding the Canadian train across Canada. It didn't pan out because of the loosening mask protocol. I had to continue to be so careful with chronic, though mostly latent, fingers crossed, cancer. But my friend and I decided to fly to Montreal anyway. Tired of the necessary use of the internet for navigation, on the 5th day in that old and venerable city, I went out to wander on my own. In the back of my mind, I was going to find Leonard Cohen's grave. A big picture of him was reflected on a downtown building. You could feel the pride and appreciation of this singer-songwriter in the city's life. I knew he returned often to his birth town. I had a general direction of where the cemetery was and headed out by foot. Leonard called me in the mid-'80s in Taos when Writing Down the Bones was first published. I was in retreat with my Zen teacher on the bluffs of the Mississippi near Iowa and missed his call. When my second book, Wild Mind, came out, I contacted him for a blurb. I was young and never forgot his gracious reply on the telephone. "I have so many friends, Natalie. Don't worry, you're on your way." In Montreal that day, I wanted to honor him. That has been my practice with many artists, to honor them by searching out their final resting place, whether only their bones and teeth after many years might be left, or their ashes gathered in one place. Cohen's would be a full body burial, no cremation, the only kind allowed in a serious Jewish cemetery. I took my time. I love to wander and get lost. As I left the busy Rue Saint Laurent behind, I asked 2 people about a big cemetery. Each pointed in opposite directions. I followed a hunch, the old way of direction. At the periphery of a long-standing neighborhood with a bakery cafe on a corner, stopping for refreshment, a rather large eclair. "Cemetery?" I inquired again as I paid my bill. A shrug of shoulders, turn of the head from the woman behind the croissants. Maybe that way, she pointed over the golden rolls. I faced a steep hill. I just knew that at the top, behind the established tall brick homes, was what I was looking for. A deep sigh. Come on, I gave myself a little encouragement. After all, this was sea level, much lower and easier for climbing than my home at 7,000 feet. Early November, not winter cold, still green, but tired grass among so many gravestones. Cohen is a recurring surname. I see one after the other in the endless rows. I surmise, a young college student, the only other person in this fading afternoon. Are you looking for the same grave as I am? He nods. How about you go this way, I point, and I go that. We both take off. A bit later, he shyly approaches me. I think I found it. He takes me rows down and indicates with a nod of his head where it is, then oddly disappears. The light is fading. Leonard Cohen is buried next to his mother. There is a big family Cohen stone, but he also has his own, 1934 to 2016. I calculate 82 years old, pretty good and rare for a star to still be close to his family, but he always stayed connected to his roots. I also know he practiced as a Zen monk for 6 years in the dry hills outside Los Angeles. Of all the graves I visited, this had by far the most paraphernalia that I had ever seen. People left coins, stones, crystals, notes, feathers, marking their visit. Hebrew lettering, more traditional, was carved in the flat stone next to his mother's. And then on his own separate headstone was his name carved large and hallelujah in huge caps in yellow at the bottom. I was happy to be there. I was in Japan when he died. My two friends and I, one Canadian, one Filipino, listened to his songs when he died, our ears against a staticky taping. This felt like a completion. I looked to my right. A slight woman stood back in the shadows. Am I taking up the space? I asked. No, no, she came forward. It's his 6th memorial today, so I brought him flowers. She indicated with a nod. Fresh ones were lying in the dirt. Oh, I didn't realize that. I tilted my head. Where are you from? She asked me. Do you know Upaya Zen Center? My sister lived there for 10 years. Did you know her? Maria. They called her Rinzan. She returned to Canada to her family. She died of cancer. I'm from around here. Now we were out of the darkening cemetery, walking downhill on the sidewalk. I think I knew your sister. She wore glasses, was a monk, shaved head. I lived down the road from Upaya Zen Center. She loved Roshi Jones' dog, Dominga, and stayed with him a full winter up at the Zen land by herself. She adored Joan Halifax, and her whole family was so thankful that she and Shinzan called in her last days. It was a great blessing, and she was so thankful. She was a very serious Zen student, a bit judgmental of everyone else. She thought they were wimps because she was so strong physically and never missed a period of Zen. I was trying to picture her. I remembered she could do the work of 3 people in the garden. She learned from my friend Wendy all about winter squash and had a joy of harvesting. Every summer, she'd come home to Toronto to renew her visa and see family. I know she tenderly took care of Dominga's grave, buried in Upaya's grounds. We turned a corner. I followed Maria's sister and listened. Her sister's death was still fresh. I think she had died about 6 months before. Let me take you out to lunch tomorrow, she said. We can go to a deli Leonard frequented, and I can show you his place nearby. I was in a daze, not quite able to digest this coincidence. And I also couldn't fully picture her sister. All of it felt very eerie, initiating in a graveyard at dusk. Sure, I said. We set it for noon. She gave me directions. What's your name? She asked. I told her. The writer? I nodded. She let out a scream. My sister read your books and gave them to me. She put a hand over her mouth in disbelief. The next day, she brought photos. Ah, yes, that's her, I said, recognizing her sister. I thought so. Yeah, there she is. She faced right into death, accepted it, very fierce. She clearly had a need to talk about her sister's death to someone who knew her in New Mexico. And I wanted to hear about her death to help alleviate the suffering. I was someone who lived down the road for 10 years. It was an honor. She then told me about first meeting Leonard, way before he was so popular. They were both young. She'd heard some of his songs and was stunned by them. Somehow her work at the time, I couldn't understand what it was, allowed her to find out what time he was flying into Montreal. She brought a huge bouquet. She showed me with her arms how big, to the airport, and saw him with 2 friends across baggage claim. She said her knees were knocking loud. She was trembling so much. Leonard saw all the flowers and said to his friends, wow, can you imagine who is so lucky? He really had no idea. She presented the flowers to Leonard Cohen, and they were friends ever since. So I think that's actually what I said about wanting the teacher, but not getting him for years. When this was happening, it was a dream for me. I couldn't believe it until I wrote about it. For me, writing is the real way of digesting things. Even reading it to you, I almost started to cry, like that really happened. And as I read it, I could picture everything, the cemetery, so it takes a while to digest things, and it takes a while to digest sitting. But I'll tell you right now, sitting still is powerful. And in the middle of all this craziness that is going on politically, the abilities to sit still, you can help everybody. I could talk more about that, but I'm not going to. I'm going to talk about the fall practice period, which I know why I want to talk about it, especially. I noticed that autumn, it's right in October, it goes on. It starts in October and it's a practice period for 6 weeks. Oh, that's nothing. And it's the goal. And it's the golden age. They're going to study the golden age of Zen, which when I discovered it, I loved it. And, and it begins with all the great koans. Do you know what a koan is? Not Leonard Cohen, but Koans. Okay. I don't want to wait. I have to check. Oh, we have to go soon. Oh, this is ridiculous. Anyway, I hope that you go and study there. But what I want to tell you is there's an old saying in writing, not in Zen. Don't tell, but show. And that's the reason also why we go to certain teachers, because they emanate. You don't have to answer every koan, but you can, if you go deeply enough in Zen, you can feel it from the person. Don't show, don't tell, but show. And I hope that when I write, I'm showing you with specificity rather than telling you about. Does that make sense? And I'm afraid that I read a lot of Zen books, not the old books, but new books, and they're telling about. And like Dogen is really there. You could feel it in his writing. If I didn't feel it in his writing, I wouldn't pay attention to him. And Dogen loves that I'm telling that, because he wants people to pay attention to his writing. But that isn't why I'm here now. This is what I really want to get to. Oh, we have too much. There's too much to learn, isn't there? And I can't believe how much I'm learning now that I'm retired. I love saying that, but I'm not really that retired. It was sad for me that in the list was not Wang Wei. Even though he's a poet, he's a great writer. And the reason I'm telling you this is really what I want you to do. I have several of my books have been changed into Beijing Chinese. Okay, more than these. But we've been writing back and forth. And they wanted my paintings for the cover, and I said, you can have them for free. Now, I hope Beijing isn't listening to this. So I said, you could have them for free. And so they said, we got pretty intimate with the publisher, but I won't say any names. And one day I thought I'd cause a little trouble. And I said, you have a great lineage that I have studied. And the woman wrote back and said to me, I know the Tang dynasty you write about, and you write about Wang Wei. And then there was a space, and she said, I love you, Natalie Goldberg. And I knew it was whispered across. Well, if you were here a few years ago, I was desperate for Jimmy Lai, I think is how you pronounce it. Do you know he was sort of the person of freedom in Hong Kong? And I was just desperate, and he's disappeared. I asked you all to watch him, but I don't know if you're even the same people I talked to a few years ago. Anyway, he's come up again. He's now not out of jail, but they're having a formal trial for 8 weeks. And I was just desperate. What can I do for him? What can I do? I was going to write to them and say, I'll write a whole book for you. I won't give it to anyone else. I won't charge you anything. I'll tell all the real secrets of everything. Just let him go. But of course, that was absurd. And when I talked to Wendy Lau, who's Chinese, she said, and I agreed, the people I know there in publishing, they might get in trouble if I email. She said they'll see the email and they'll delete it immediately, because we don't know. But we also know there's a heart there. I love you, Natalie Goldberg. Do you understand? So things are not black and white. But I wish they would leave Jimmy Lai alone. Do you know him? How many of you are aware of him? Yeah, he gave everything for freedom. He's the embodiment. Oh, we're not supposed to say freedom. I mean, over there. I don't know if it matters over there. But could you please pay attention? And if there's anything you can think of doing, do it. And at least read in the newspaper. I have a big picture of him from the New York Times hanging, but it's really curling now in my kitchen. And, you can do what you can do, but I would do anything for him to get out. I can't bear it. It's time. I haven't taught you anything about koans or koan or anything, but that's good. Do you want to end with a Wang Wei poem? Would you like to hear Wang Wei from that period? I realized I found this in my journal, and it's actually, there was a period many, many years ago on January 4th. The reason I know it was one of my happiest birthdays. I did nothing for my birthday. And then I went at night. Henry Shookman and Joan, Roshi Joan, excuse me, were sharing haiku that night, not haiku, Chinese poems. And so I write a whole thing, but I'm not going to read you that. You have to read the book, okay? But I'm going to read you one, and you're going to like it. Because he's good. Lazy About Writing Poems by Wang Wei. Let me just have a little sip. And I need to say, please buy my new book. Not because I'm going to make money on it, but because the publisher watches, and then I have the ability to publish another book, which I will do. Okay, ready? Lazy About Writing Poems by Wang Wei. Wang Wei, tell us how we can free Jimmy Lau. With time, I become lazy about writing poems. Now my only company is old age. In an earlier life, I was a poet, a mistake, and my former body belonged to a painter. I can't abandon habits of that life, and sometimes am recognized by people of this world. My name and pen name speak my former being, but about all this, my heart is ignorant. Good, huh? Wang Wei, very modern. So thank you very much. This is very preliminary, but if you can in October, I'm supposed to be in Iowa for my new book, but if I can, I'm going to come in October. Those are my favorite people they're studying in October. In autumn. Okay, now what do we do? I think we chant. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Please support Upaya.